Yeah. All right. Then, dear guests, thank you so much for joining this morning for this panel, which marks a culmination of our incredible journey with the Essence of Home project. Um, on behalf of the Moon Gallery Foundation, I would like to thank everyone who contributed to the success of this endeavor and supported us at some challenging times as well. The Essence of Home began as an artist in residency program for the Ukrainian artists who relocated to the Netherlands due to the impacts of war. And our appreciation goes to the residency curator, Anna Buivit, and to talented artists, Anna Kahiani and Katerina Limar, excuse me, for their dedication and creativity. And we are also really grateful to the Prince Bernhard funds who, trusted in our ability to carry out this project and supported this very important initiative. But as the project evolved, we wanted to embrace a little bit broader perspective and capture the essence of home through the eyes of multiple international artists. And I want to thank every participant. I apologize in advance if I pronounce any of the names wrong. Nosh, Nene, Esther van der Heijden, Mary Cowper, Penjang, Hita Scully, Desiree van den Berg, Omar, Marike van der Velden, Philip Brink, the Bosnian Collective, and of course, our artist in residency, again, Anna Kihiani and Katerina Limar, for bringing your authentic insights on this topic and helping to shape this project in a unique way. And this exploration wouldn't be possible without Ismay Detinga, who took on this challenge and produced an incredible exhibition on a very short notice. A special mention of gratitude goes to the Africa Fund, whose support and belief in our mission made this exhibition possible, and of course to A-Lab as our valued partner throughout this whole journey. So now I'm kind of done with this formal part, and I would like to, with a pleasure, forward the word to the host of today's panel, Leila Setsevich.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Leila, and I'm the Director of Communications at the Moon Gallery Foundation, and have been on this journey with Elisabetta and Anna and all our artists for the last year or so. I think many of us on the call today, or in fact, all of us on the call today, have some experience with different homes, with immigration, with kind of questioning what this means. So for me, I just will kind of start a little bit. Home is a very nebulous idea. My family live in Australia, and typically when I talk about them or I talk about Australia, I say back home. But when I'm in Australia, I often refer to going back home to Iceland. So this idea is very malleable and very different to me. And I think this is becoming increasingly true for a lot of people. But I think that there's a very distinct difference between when it's a choice and when it isn't. So I choose to live in Iceland. I choose to not live in Australia, and I have rights and the passports and things that I can, that I need to do this. But I also didn't choose to leave my childhood home, Bosnia, because that choice was made for me both circumstantially and also by my parents. And so countless of millions also don't have a choice in the matter, which can seriously, I think, complicate the idea of home and identity. And then, of course, there's the home that we all share, our precious blue planet, which we're increasingly abusing and taking for granted. And I think here at the Moon Gallery, we spend a lot of time talking about an imagined future, our off-planetary home. And we ask a lot of questions about human identity, artistic practice, and our connection to our home planet. So today, I'm really excited that we have gathered this really diverse group of artists, activists, communicators, and other artistic practitioners who have unique and possibly sometimes complicated ideas of the concept of home. So I'm going to give them all a brief opportunity to introduce themselves, as they will do a far better job of that than I think I would. So I will start with Taya.
Hello. as it was mentioned, my name is Taya. Really grateful to be here. Thank you so much for Elisaveta and Leila for organizing and inviting. Um, my name is Taya. I'm based in Den Haag in the Netherlands. I'm a 3D designer and game maker. I make a lot of works in the digital space as a way of exploring topics in a more broader sense than we can physically. We take on limitless boundaries online, and so I like to push those limits in my work in digital space through interactive game making.
Great, thank you very much. Anahita.
Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Anahita. I'm an artist, activist, writer, filmmaker. Currently working on a campaign and also a documentary about to end whaling in Iceland. So currently, I'm based in Iceland, but I've taken a nomadic life since I cannot go back to my country because I've been speaking as an activist about it. So yeah, I'm a nomad, and I think I can add a lot of information about my experience about it on this subject. Yeah, thank you for being with us.
And Natalia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for inviting me. My name is Natalia, as you can see and heard. I am from Siberia, but I live now in the Netherlands. I'm an artist who works with language, and I'm interested in the process of speaking, writing, reading, and translating. And for me, why I'm interested in also in the language, because I'm very affected by how language affects our ideas of identity and representation, and also how language, how we understand through language our body and emotions. And for me, the notion of home is also very interesting, I would say, because I don't live in my home region anymore. I moved from Buryatia when I was 18 years old, and I lived in a different cities, and now I live in the Netherlands. So idea of home was also shaped for me, as for all of you, as you mentioned. And I'm very interested in our conversation. Looking forward to
it. Pedro.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Pedro. I'm a Brazilian communication specialist based at the moment in Germany. And I usually work translating concepts into visual aids and sentences that can help people that usually doesn't have many opportunities in Brazil to have a better understanding of what's going on in politics and social programs that the government runs. For the first time in my life, experiencing the possibilities of working the same thing in a new language that I'm still learning, and also of what happens in the other side of the ocean.
Great. And then Lisa, I will allow you to also introduce yourself briefly.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm Elisaveta. I'm one of the co-founders of the Moon Gallery Foundation. Besides that, I'm also a creative. I'm a designer and creative developer. I work also with the languages, not just the one which are spoken. And of course, as most of you guys here, I'm also an expat myself. I have been living in several countries, and yeah, I hope I can also contribute to this conversation with my experiences.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for introducing yourselves. Just to give everybody an idea, we have broken down the discussion into different sections, slightly different topics. I'll start off each one by directing a question at one of you, but of course, this is a conversation, not a series of monologues. So I would love for you to jump in and tell us about your experiences and your opinions. So we'll start with talking a little bit about what makes a home. and what does the word mean to us, and how has the idea changed over time? And I'll start with you, Lisa, I guess. I mean, you live in Germany currently, and as far as I know, I think it's your third country of residence, but please correct me if I'm totally off the mark there. And I'm really curious how you define what home is, and what boxes does a place or a feeling need to tick in order to feel like home to you?
Yeah, I think, thank you for this question. To be honest, I've been thinking a lot about it, of course, because of my personal experiences moving from place to place, but also due to this residency and Essence of Home project that we were working. And like some of the artists from the Essence of Home, changing my residency was my personal choice. That is something that I decided to do, and especially when I was leaving Russia, it was pretty much something very natural, a kind of natural transition, almost growing into my new self. Like that was the first time when I left the home where I lived with my parents, kind of a first step into the adult life. And on one hand, it still was very kind of extreme experience, because a lot of things has changed in a very short amount of time, and a lot of new challenges arises, both in terms of language, in terms of just managing on a very day-to-day basis my life, but also emotionally. I think if we're talking about feelings, for me, mostly the feeling of home is connected to the feeling safe, to the feeling of belonging, to the feeling of having kind of a safe network around, and mostly that's also connected to people. But I think I really throughout the time I really embraced this physical change of the home to this kind of internal process into of growing to a new self, and not just like moving from country to country, but almost like once this need to change a house, to move to a new place, to build it over again, just because it also really very connected to me feeling that I need to change something needs to become different within me. And funny enough, I see a lot of parallels within how the artists approach this within their artistic practice, because every time I kind of choose a new home, the first step is staging a home in a way. Like you cannot immediately grow into the new place and be like, oh, that's my home. So the first thing you start do is staging, and there are obviously multiple strategies to it, like something symbolic. For example, like a cup that you carry from one place to another, and this is the first thing that you pack before you move, or like something to which you kind of attach this essence of home, or other like through kind of what would be a good word, through manifesting it, I guess. Like you start buying something on which stays home, or like get a certain keychain for the new house, or funny enough, when I moved to Germany, one of my first purchases was a trash bin. I really love this trash bin, but that was my feeling of like saying, okay, that is my new home, and that is how I make it comfortable for me. This is something of mine that is going to be here. And I think this is really funny how like really within these transitions happen slowly, from you needing to stage your home, kind of surround yourself with the things that make you feel, towards actually feeling like at home and kind of taking the agency of your surrounding. And for me, that always a lot related to these very small things, like to people with who I talk, to the favorite coffee places that I start having in a new place, to the shop owners who start recognizing me, like to good friends that I get in the new places. This is the steps where I really start feeling that I'm becoming like at home.
I see in what you're talking about kind of two separate things. One is those emotional connections and people, and the other one is objects. And I'm kind of fascinated by this idea of objects, and I'm curious from the rest of the panel. I have two objects as well that are really important to me. One is a gift that I had from a friend who sadly passed away, and even if I go somewhere for 3 months, it comes with me at all times. And then I have another one that is, once it's the last thing that I've unpacked in the house, I feel I have settled into a house. And so I've been living in my new place for 2 months now, and it's not yet unpacked because it's not quite there yet. So there's a kind of, I'm curious about, for example, you, Anahita, because you are kind of, I think, probably a little bit more nomadic than everybody else here who's kind of been based in their places for a little while. I'm curious if you have objects that are, or something that makes you feel a little bit more rooted and within yourself.
My backpack. It's for me, it's I always ask this question. It's an ever-growing question inside of me. It's not never just like a permanent answer for that. And where is home? Especially started when I couldn't go back to Iran anymore. So I was always thinking, okay, I go everywhere, and then I always go back to where my root is, and then that will be home, where my parents are, everything. But like, as for talking about objects, having a nomadic life and constantly losing stuff, I mean, trying to fit your life in a backpack, and then every time, I mean, any moment to be ready to just jump out. I don't even have a house that I could like say I have one back in Milan, and like I have my piano and stuff there, but I haven't touched my piano in the last year at all. So it's just on Airbnb, other people are living there. So it's like, I kind of lost the concept of owning things. And then I thought, okay, my body is my home. So, and then, but then you break a bone and you feel like shit, like, am I actually, like, is this my home? Like, it's getting wrinkled and I might lose it any moment. So, but I guess the thing that I feel closest as an object could be still my body. I mean, because I keep thinking that, okay, I'm going to lose this and this and that, and I can still carry this body around and be fully naked somewhere, and I can start a home from that point. So I guess as an object, I could just tell you that, yeah, my body is my home for the moment. I mean, with the concept of woman life freedom and the ownership that's going on in that country, like the ownership of women's body there, and the whole idea of that they decide who you should give it to, who you should cover it from, or all of that, how you should dress it up, or where should you put it, and all this limitations of, as an Iranian passport owner, the places that you can't go, it's banned and everything. It's also a very interesting thing, like there's so much limitation into any certain freedom of a home, if you want to imagine. But the closest thing, I think, still is my body. I think I can live in that. I hope I have answered very well. But my backpack is also.
Yeah, that's great. Does anybody else have kind of anything to add to that? I think it's opened a really interesting avenue of conversation.
I'll take a little peek. I think there's two interesting like linguistic epithets that we can like put Elizaveta's statements and Anahita's statements into. You have the whole idea of like making a house a home, that there's this transformative aspect that goes into the house to homing, and that can be done through objects and bringing memories and memorabilia and the staging process like you described. And then there's home is where the heart is. And, this is like the really corny one that you sometimes see on like the barn wood and it's painted on and you buy it at some kitschy shop. But this is also, even in like an embodied sense, home is quite literally where the heart is. You can set up shop wherever. I think that's also a really fantastic, like the two fork discussion. I think it's very interesting. Home is where the heart is. It's so oversaid, it becomes like almost semi-ironical. But when you remove all of the weird visual imagery that we have associated with it, it's actually at the core of it, we're born with our homes. It's super intrinsic and very embodied.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I wanted to add something. because when Elisabetta was talking, Elisabetta was mentioning a lot about moving from one place to another. And I remember, because we are both from Russia, Elisabetta and I remember that actually this moving can be an interesting thing to look at, because for some people, moving from one place to another can be quite difficult because the access is denied. Even if you live, for example, I was born in Buryatia, and then I went to study in St. Petersburg, and because of my Asian appearance, I would be constantly reminded that I don't belong to St. Petersburg. And I also have friends who were born or lived in St. Petersburg longer than I did, and there would be the whole environment, and some people would be quite aggressive towards them, because the idea of home has this question, or like a concept of origin. So people will be aggressively asking them, well, where do you come from? So asking like, is this your home? Like, do you really belong here? And I found it in Russia, it's a quite big, it's a very big problem, that people have a lot of tension on in a racial relationship. So there is always this idea that you should go back home somewhere. So, for example, in the public spaces, especially, you will be encountered by this question or a statement, or people want to, they will tell you to go back home. So where is this home? And that's a very interesting experience in Russia, like quite painful, because Russia is also a home of a lot of different nations. It's a huge country, and then that you don't. For example, Moscow is also my city, right? So it's a capital of a country. But in Moscow, for me, it's the most unsafest place on earth as a feeling. Even though it's a nice city, it's quite beautiful and stuff like that. But I get very scared to go to Moscow. And I think a lot of people who are not Slavic Russians have similar experiences as me. And so that's why I think a lot of people struggle, as I do, especially when I'm in Russia, thinking about what is home. If I move to another city within Russia and I'm not welcome there, and then I'm from Russia and then I speak fluently in Russian, but then I'm denied to all these public spaces. It's not very safe. But then also, if I go back home to my Buryatia, then sometimes I encounter also all other Slavic Russians who will be also telling me to go back home. But then I'm like, I am at home. And then so I think what they mean is that they think that I'm Chinese, that then I should go back to China, which is also another level of racist prejudice, I think, or of thinking that everybody who looks East Asian, they're all from China. So this is in Russia, it's like it really is crazy place to be alive, I think. That's what I wanted to add.
It leads really well actually into the next question, into the next point of the discussion. It's really weird that in large places like that, I experienced a tiny little bit of this, not to the same extent anywhere near, during COVID, when I was trying to get back home to Australia. And there were a lot of comments on Facebook from Australians in Australia kind of saying, well, you chose to leave, so you can just stay there now. We don't need you from Europe with your like COVID disease or something. And it was just a very, very weird, like, what are your rights? Like, I have a passport, I have the rights, I have a right to be here, I have a right to, to participate in society in that way. So, but I wanted to kind of take that into the next set of next kind of point discussion, which is around politics. And your home is also a very politically loaded concept. Like we just said, who has access to what, passports, and sometimes expressions of home don't actually reflect the political reality. For example, again, I'll just say in the Australian national anthem, there is a line that says, "For those who've come across the seas with boundless plains to share." But that really rings hollow to a lot of immigrants, and especially those who are asylum seekers. So I'll direct this one at Anahita. You know, you're an activist and you're an artist, and your work is often inherently political. And you and I met at the dawn of a particularly troubled time for your country. I remember you had just flown in from Iran. And you know, I of course I personally know of at least one campaign where your artistic expression has been really effective, actually, in drawing attention to a cause. And I guess I'd love to hear a little bit about how the political informs your artistic process, and why do you think that art is a particularly effective way to campaign, and especially in matters of freedom and home?
Well, to explain how it affects, I should tell you a little bit background, and I would love to talk to you about my conversation that I always have with my father. I'm a copy paste by the paths I've chosen in my life. I'm copy paste of my father. So he was also banned. He was sentenced to death. He got pardoned happily, and because he was writing and he was an activist. But he never left the country. His idea of, we had a horrible childhood, to be honest. It was really hard because any moment they would kill him. We had fake IDs and everything, but inside Iran. So it's like we were not welcome inside the country. And then we had to run away from one house to another house. So even like the meaning of home, it was already a nomadic life when I was a child also. And I was angry at him all the time that why you didn't leave the country? Why this nationalistic feeling of this is my country, my people, what does it mean? He answered something very beautiful. And he said, like, I don't say that I own this land. I say that I'm a guardian of this land. When you are born with a gift of being, for example, from a certain place, it means that you have something to guard. There's a gift that you need to guard it. And if you don't do it, nobody else will. So if everybody leaves, then who will take care of this place? And for me, that was just like interesting. And it started for me asking this question that then, now that I cannot go back to Iran, what is it that I am guarding? And I think the story of humanity started with the fall, as in like in biblical, but it's not. It's a very archetypal story of that. When you lose something, you start to understand maybe what are you, or what is that identity, or what is the sense of home. I would never understand it unless now that I cannot go back, and I feel like, what does it mean to be Iranian and have Iran as a home that you cannot go back, made me realize it's beyond that. Having a certain identity from a homeland, it's a certain knowledge or certain collective idea. It's not just a physical place. It's just an idea that you can nourish it and make it better and then send it to the next generation. And what is the best way of communicating that if it's not art, Because when you, like art, poem, anything that sits in the soul, because it comes out of a part of your part of humanity that is not physical. It's almost not tangible. It's very vague. It's very existential. So how do you communicate something that is so rooted inside of you if it's not art? So yeah, I think that's my form of activism. That's my form of communication about home, about what we should do as a humanity. Where are these boundaries and borders? Where do they start? Where do they end? And yeah, all of that. Good to have you.
Always. This is why I don't turn it off, because then I just Pedro, I know that you have worked on, public relations kind of communication campaigns back home in Brazil. And that is a very specific type of kind of often targeted at kind of people's sense of identity and home, I think, depending on what the campaign is. I'm just curious about your experience around that and in different environments.
Well, it's a bit hard to explain because even when I was in Brazil, the concept of home was something very elastic because I used to live and work at the capital, Brasilia, but I also would change to another side of the country from time to time to work, like when we had to communicate the transposition of the São Francisco River through the northeastern region of Brazil. And I had to get in contact with the people that would be affected. And it was a huge work that I had to visit around 4 or 5 states in a time shift of 3 days and get into contact with the people that would live there that would be affected in different ways, because in one part you would have the risk of new diseases that would come with the movement of the river. You have the insects that would grow, and I could see people that live in a distance from 200 to 300 kilometers from each other, and their lives would be completely different. Their concept of home, of family would be different. Some people would live in a house, others would live in a thing that we call the palafita, where is a house over the river, built over stakes, and they wouldn't have access to a bathroom or anything like this, and you had to explain to them that the water that would be running under the houses would be the water that someone would be drinking in a few kilometers away. And sometimes it's hard to explain those concepts to people who are living the margin of society. And that's not something new. That's something, sadly, that Brazil deals with since before it was a republic, since before it was a democratic republic. And sadly, in the last years, we had this polarization in Brazil that it's deepening the problem, because we have now a new government that's striving hard to get the people together again. But before that, with what happened during the COVID, for example, we had all discussions that would be important for the country being politicized, and then it would be divided between those who would support the ruling government at that time and those who were against it. And that made some concepts that should be universal to the man, to the human dignity, they become part of the political discussion. They were appropriated by both sides, and then you would have a seizure in Brazilian society. The concept of home in this way, it's something that, for me, home, it's a place where I should feel safe, where I identify with. And in the last times, for me and for many Brazilians, that's not what the country were anymore. We are now in 2023, and since 2018, more than 5 million Brazilians left the country. It's the greatest diaspora. We're not at war. We're not under a situation that should force it, but we have a whole generation who lost faith in the future of the country. Because we grow up hearing about how Brazil would be the country of the future, how it would get on, and people would have their rights preserved. And what we've seen the last years, that due to this discussion, this moment of extreme uncertainty, we are seeing our generations leaving the country because they don't feel home there anymore. Many of them are going to Portugal, here in Europe, to Italy, to Spain, to Germany, and many others to North America, to the United States and Canada, because the concept of home for those who are feeling displaced in their own country have changed. You're not safe anymore. We have neighbors fighting neighbors, families who stop talking with each other because of political views. And that saddens me a lot, because I can hear from you all here better reasons to be displaced, better motives to be away. And sadly, what I see now is that most of the reasons that we have back there is just the greed of a few that contribute to this.
Oh, I totally can relate to that. I think it's also actually to both. I think it's often for me a question of this going back, or like staying or going away. I think it's such a question that currently just comes within the practice, within whatever you are doing, because on one hand, there is always this sense of guilt that's, or I don't know, at least in my practice, there is this always kind of sense of guilt that you could have done more, you could have been there for your country, or when things are not great, like you could have contributed somehow, because I don't know, we are all educated, intelligent, artistic, I don't know, we could have done something better, at the same time realizing how realistic your contribution is, or like how adequate the results of this contribution to the risks of this contribution is always such a difficult, I don't know, ethical question for me, and I never really know the answer. I think that's one of the biggest identity struggles, which I don't know, I have, and I think a lot of people who are doing, especially like artistic practices or activism related to that, I don't know, we're all facing it.
Yeah, I find it's really interesting for me. I have lost my right to vote in Australia because I haven't lived there for 7 years. So I have to reestablish residency in order to be able to vote again. But I still have a right to vote in Bosnia. And I'm really angry about having lost my right to vote in Australia, but I don't exercise my right to vote in Bosnia. And there's this like really weird, complicated feeling around that. And I don't know why. I just don't feel that connection. But I'll be like, well, the country could do much better. And I'm like, well, I have a vote that could help that, But I just wanted to, like, this is such an interesting discussion. But there was something, Pedro, that you said that really kind of got me thinking, and I haven't been able to let go of this thought. And it kind of links back into, what are our choices around where we live, what we do, what we call home. And there's something really interesting we said around kind of the political aspect of it, is that some people, not only do they not have a choice in that definition, but they're often used as a political tool for other people who are making the choice for them. They don't actually have a say, they don't actually have a voice, but there'll be all this noise around them from two different sides who are using them as a political pawn. And I find that actually to be one of the more distressing kind of aspects of this thing around choice and kind of autonomy and identity. I'm curious if anybody's got kind of anything to add or any experiences around that to add, and how they've kind of navigated that kind of knowing that you are being used for something that is out of your control.
I wanted just to add, maybe not in that theme as you mentioned. I had to think, does it fit what I'm going to say or not? But then I just, like we are talking about moving and rediscovering the home. But then I was thinking, did we actually move? Because on my personal level, I'm still in Russia. I'm still in Buryatia. I live here in Europe already 10 years. But I don't really check news in the Netherlands that much. And I check news from Russia on a daily basis, like what's going on with Ukraine, Russia, Buryatia. Like I'm always there mentally. And also the language contributes a lot to that. Also like having diasporas around me and the different worlds, because Russia is such a huge country. And there are a lot of layers of different people and different nations. And so, for example, now I feel like it's getting very complicated in my head because the borders became very physical. You cannot enter Russia that easily anymore. And it started actually with COVID because the COVID really showed that the borders were physical. Before, it was, my life was very easy. So you could just buy a ticket and go back and then come back. And then you would also say like, I don't really feel difference. There is only 3 hours away from home, you know, but it's actually not true because the borders are real and they are physical. And then now I start questioning like, okay, what is my mental home and what is actually my language of choice. And for example, I live in the Netherlands, but I speak Dutch, but I don't practice Dutch every day. I just use it to order some coffee at a restaurant or like something else. So I don't know when this moment of mine, of this realization that I do I have rights to change something in Buryatia or in Russia because I don't live there? Does my voice contribute to something? Does my actual voice mean anything to people who live in Buryatia? Because, you know, I don't go there anymore and things change very fast. The Buryatia, which is in my head, is completely different than it is now. And I don't talk to people that much. I don't really have the touch of reality that what is there. And these questions, sometimes I wake up and think like, what is my role? Where am I? What is my position? And which language should I choose? You know, which language should I use? And yeah, this physical borders. I was wondering what you think about it.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
It's for me it's really interesting this question, and I asked this question many times for myself. And recently, I'm realizing that like the idea of home resonates so much with settling, but what if it's not about settling? Because we are not. We are super dynamic. We're organic creatures. We constantly change, and how can you define a settlement for something that is constantly changing? And if you are by nature having a personality that is like constantly growing, it's just like how do you change that home for yourself? How will you choose? I mean, my backpack kind of gives me this possibility of not limiting myself to a certain place, but I rather think of home recently as something that can contain this new person that I have become until I change it, or maybe it's an ever changing kind of home. So the language that I'm speaking right now is like English. I'm learning a little bit of Icelandic just to, you know, like I'm getting some expressions here there. I mean, like I say like you like, you know, like even like I'm not using the English sometimes words. So I think all of that comes with me and then just like travels with me and stays around me as much as I want. So this idea of buildings, maybe we should also change that in the meaning of a house, you know, home and house, constantly limiting, and just like get rid of those walls, get rid of boundaries, and then define where you can sit in this period of time.
I don't know if anybody has anything to add, but I see it as a great opening into kind of the next thing. And I'm actually the part of the conversation that I'm most excited about, because I think by the sounds of it, we all have quite complex ideas around this, and that is language. I feel like I have a slightly different personality depending what language I speak in. Bosnian, I am a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more forward. In English, I'm much better at expressing my feelings. And like Anahita as well, I'm trying to pick up little bits of Icelandic, and I think I'm a little bit more curious when trying to kind of get myself into that frame of mind. And I really love what you were talking about, like whatever language you're using, and we are very dynamic and very transient just as beings, not just physically moving from place to place. And I know many of us here have, Natalia, obviously you with your work, have quite complex relationships and ideas around language. And I just want to open that up. I kind of decided to change things a little bit and not direct that question to any particular person, because I think that there's just a really interesting conversation here to be had with everyone. So if anybody wants to jump in and talk about the difficulties, challenges, and kind of love of language as well, I'd love to hear it.
Well,
Pedro?
yeah. No, it's just because I had to say that I love what you just said about the idea of a different personality due to the language you're speaking, especially now that I'm learning German for the first time in my life. And sometimes I feel like I'm becoming someone else, because it was the Pedro that lived in Brazil, Portuguese. And here I open parentheses, because Portuguese, it's not Brazilian Portuguese, it's not a language. It's a bunch of languages under a trench coat, pretending that they're just one. Because we take words from the Portugal spoken in the Portuguese spoken in Portugal. We take words from Japanese, that because we had a huge immigration from Japanese in the past. The same with Italian, and even other languages like Russian. We have there a few words in Portuguese that come from Russia, and also the indigenous people that live in Brazil. And for me, sometimes it's hard to translate a concept of a word that we only have there, like, for example, saudade, which it's a word that we use for the sentiment of longing, but it's more poetic. You are not just missing something, you are longing for something. You can feel saudade for someone who's alive but it's distant. You can feel saudade for someone who's dead. You can feel saudade for a moment in your life that you don't live anymore. Or you can also feel saudade for a moment that you live every day, but not at the moment. Now you're longing for something at the end of the day or before going to sleep. And sometimes I trip on concepts in other languages, like in English or now in German, and that they translate for me some concepts in Brazil that now I know where they came from. Some words that they're not from the Portuguese from Portugal, and they're also not from the Indians. And now I'm starting to understand, oh, so that's where this concept came from, because we have a word that's almost the same, Brazilianized meaning for it. And being here now, I try to understand who's this new Pedro who I'm becoming, this Deutsch version of me, because there are, for me, some rituals that translates into being a Brazilian, that translates into being home. And those rituals, they are sometimes very different from what people do here. For example, going to the supermarket to buy some groceries. The concept's the same. Oh, I'm going there, bringing something home. Okay, but when I am there, I am expected to act in a way that it's not the way that Brazilians act in public. I have spoken with Elizabeth, for example, in the course, that we like to touch people, we like to hug people. Sometimes when we meet, we hug. We don't just hold hands. That's a very formal way of treating people. But when you like someone, you give a hug, you give a kiss in the cheek. Depending, you give 2 kisses in the cheek. Depending on the regions, 3 kisses. And have a hug for people who we're not very fond of, which, if you see our politicians, they do it every time. It's a hug where you put the other arm in front. It's like, oh, close. And living in Deutschland is in Germany, for me, this part, because people here are very formal, even in the informal relations. They tend to keep a distance, and that's for me maybe the biggest shock I'm having here. It's not just language is completely different. Brazilian Portuguese, it's a free language. You can speak in many, many ways, but German, they have this position for every word, this suspense that you have the verb at the end, so you have to listen carefully to everything, like you're watching a movie, a drama movie. Okay, what now, what's he telling me? And then it comes the verb at the end. Okay, he said he just drank some water. Oh, fantastic, it's not a flood in the streets. That's my perception.
I can relate.
Yeah, there.
Cannot say better.
Oh, the stereotype,
No.
right?
Yeah, I know. I can also a little short thing to it. I mean, in my perception, words in certain languages have a weight. So it's not just a word with a meaning. If you learn a language in a book, you haven't actually learned the language. For example, as an example, like what in the recent events that happened in Iran, there was a 10-year-old boy who got shot and died. And there's a video from him that says in the name of the rainbows instead of saying in the name of the God, in the name of God. He says in the name of the rainbow. And forever the rainbow is a different meaning now. Or if you say rainbow here, it's just like has like LGBTQ community and all of these things. But when I say rainbow in English, for me, it has the way of all of that, like the rights to LGBTQ community and also like rainbow itself. But when I say that in Persian, it means totally something else, like recently. So the way that you learn one word in one language comes with a identity behind it. And then it can totally lose its meaning when you translate it. So yeah, different personalities, different people with different backgrounds and different languages. Yeah.
Natalia, your work centers a lot around language. I'm really curious to hear what you've got to say.
And now I'm gonna say some banal stuff, like everything knows about. No, it's just actually I asked a lot this question: in which language do you think? And then I was thinking about it really, like which language do I think? And then I realized that actually I don't really think in a language. I feel like more in impression, you know, especially when you're reading a book. You're not actually. I have that thing. When I'm reading in a book, I go inside, and then I don't really see particular images or something. I just have this impression of some kind of a feeling. So I thought maybe when I write poems in my own first language, I have a very weird thing that some of the indigenous languages in Russia, we don't really practice them at school, so we don't really fully learn the languages. So I have a very weird relationship with my first language, is that it's a more a feeling. So it's not more like really something that you feel, and then it comes out, and then you search word for it. And with the English or Dutch, because they are my more distant languages that I speak, I feel like sometimes I lack that emotional connection with it. And it's also very weirdly comes with when you swear. You know, when you swear and you did something, usually I swear in Russian, because Russian is also, I consider Russian also as my mother tongue. And it just comes like, you know, it just, this body kind of mind connection, emotion comes into that word, which bad word usually. And in other languages, for example, if I say in English, fucking hell, it doesn't really mean anything to me. Because I didn't grow up with the language, and I didn't accumulate the feeling, connection with the feeling, emotions, and also maybe context. And I really start looking at it more, and then also what Anahita said about the translation. I think the translation is never about translating one word to another. It's about translating the context. so you can say different things. Yeah, and I found it also what I really look at the languages that hierarchy. I don't know how to say it in English. Like I'm saying it really weirdly. So that, for example, in Russia, Russian language is a dominant language. And I found it very interesting to see that through communist propaganda, Russian language was made as this huge, beautiful language. It has this huge, big prestige and status. In Russia, it is only in Russian language people can write poetry or high literature. But it, of course, like every language has its own poetry and high literature, every language literature and stuff. And I found it interesting that people can create such a big, they can put a language of somebody on a pedestal, and all other languages become like some kind of other stuff, like, second language, or maybe more like they say a primitive language. I always look at it, and I found it also interesting that some of the places, for example, Siberia, has a lot of stereotypes, and it also comes from the language, so like a backward place or something like that. But the place is not like that. It's just that created through the language, and I found it. I think I have a lot of frustration about it, but I also find it interesting to look at how this mechanism works. A lot of
I'm just curious, which languages are you making your performance? It's like if you're using language.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Before I used to work more with Buryat language, because I make my performances in a video, and then I have a freedom to use subtitles, and I have a freedom to use to send the video to all other places. And of course, my first language is endangered language, so I want to keep it. Also, that I practice it. But now, because I want to make more live performances, and now I'm really struggling with these questions, like which language should I choose to make my live performances, and I haven't figured this out yet, because I don't really know what should I do. And then I also realized that language is a group thing. So what we were saying, maybe then when we become different persons in different languages, maybe it's about the group where we are in. So when we are alone, maybe we don't need the language. We don't communicate to each other with language to yourself. So I don't say like, okay, Natalia, drink tea. I just feel that I need to drink some water, so I don't say it to myself. So I feel like it's really like a group social dynamic. So, and then I think it depends on what I want to say. Do I want to communicate something like a message, or do I want to tell a story, or do I want to have a feeling? If it's a feeling because I have a connection with my language, so then maybe I will choose Buryat. I think I resolved my answers. I'm gonna make your performances in Buryat, like with a more lighter heart.
I think that, I don't know, I would, for me as an observer, I would be so just would love to see performances in a language that is most expressive for you, even if I can't understand it. That would, I think, I don't know, but I could be wrong. It could be that I get more out of them in English, but it's an interesting question that you're grappling with, I think. Also, what is meaningful for you, but also what will the audience connect with, I guess. But I'm curious. I'm curious, Taya. You're living in the Netherlands, and I don't know why I'm thinking of this right now, but there was a thread I read the other day and about like how totally weird and like bizarro Dutch is to native English speakers, and there was a tweet that I saw where like, especially there's a tweet that I saw was like, somebody was like, I'm in Berlin, and then I'm like, what's wrong with this person's German? No, what's wrong with me? Dutch,
Yes,
right?
a secret third thing.
I'm really curious about these having spent a little bit of time in the Netherlands, I find this really weird too. Like I'll overhear a conversation in Dutch, and I'll just like, there's this like weird little like twitch where I'm like, what is happening right now around me? Like I don't know how to explain it, and I'm just curious about that experience and how it can make you feel maybe slightly unsettled or weird, or I don't know. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of eavesdropping first and foremost. I'm a little gossip gal by nature. I love nosiness. And so when I was living in Vancouver, you know, you're hearing someone on the phone and they're giving you the gift of gab by giving you the hottest story in their life to everyone on the whole bus. And you're just giving them your ear and you're listening and you're taking it in. And these scenarios are completely gone from my life for the most part. I remember when I first moved, I was sitting on a tram in The Hague with one of my Dutch friends. And he was getting really exasperated by this conversation that was being had with two women, 2 seats in front of us. He was like, oh my God, if only you could understand what they were saying, you would be like just as exasperated with the conversation as I was. And now, 5 years into the game, I, through like osmosis, have absorbed some Dutch language and Dutch understanding. And now I am piecing together little pieces of gossip and conversation as it comes. And it makes a really interesting web for what I imagine this person is talking about versus what they're actually talking about, because there's only so far my understanding can go and how many contextual links I can make based off of how many words I know. But there's something really interesting about contextual awareness in eavesdropping and being aware of your surroundings through sound. There's been a couple of instances where I've managed to get myself in unsafe scenarios. And in these unsafe scenarios, I don't have the wherewithal to allow part of my brain to start translating for conversations in which I may be in immediate danger versus prioritizing my own safety. So in this aspect, eavesdropping is totally not to my benefit. I don't have any opportunity to glean contextual clues that could allude to, well, do I actually need to get out of this place right now? Or is this person a safe person to talk to? These kinds of things are completely gone. And of course, you know, with work and practice of the language and these problems can be alleviated. But currently, it leaves me quite fractured from quite a large part of conversations contextually in the community. And that's one thing that I find can either have me like feeling insider, outsider, interlocutor, these kinds of things. And then if we were to take it a little back, Pedro and Natalia were bringing up something very interesting about the hierarchy of languages and also its understanding and how language changes and evolves. And while you were all talking, I couldn't stop thinking about how in St. Martin, where my mother's side of the family is from, and I grew up there for 7 years before moving to Canada, Dutch is, of course, spoken there as a formality because St. Martin is part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And of course, it's a hot tourist destination, you know, Caribbean islands. So you get a large influx of people from the mainland who come and have their holiday on the island and go back. But the real language of the people is a Creole language, which is a hybrid of Papiamento, English, Dutch, and it's all a process of colonialization. The words come in, they stick, they stay. And when I have the opportunity, like in my childhood, to go back to St. Martin, it's almost like it washes over you. You speak in Creole, or you know, your personality, who you are, evolves and changes into the person who fits in to St. Martin as a local, because I am not a tourist. I have a family home there. My aunt is from there. My mother is from there. I have long-standing family history there. And then it's it's like you walk through a portal and you step into this new linguistic reality, contextual. Where do I fit into the social hierarchy now on the island in between tourists and locals? And I think there's, it's incredibly dynamic. It's always a mishmash. And then with Creole, it's so important when you are there to be speaking it presently, because it's also constantly changing with new words. If there's a word that doesn't exist, it's made up on the spot and then populated in WhatsApp groups. And so, there's so much vibrancy and dynamicism within language and how context affects it. It's I mean, I just love linguistics. I think it's a like prime human evolution, how we speak and how we can communicate with others.
I really love how it impacts I think hugely our feeling of belonging. For me, I don't feel unwelcomed in Iceland, but I do feel like there's some aspect of Icelandic society that is not accessible to me because I don't speak the language.
Yeah.
And in a place like Iceland, it's really like it's challenging in a different way because everybody does speak English. So there isn't really like any true incentive, if you know what I mean. Like I can get through life fine. Like there's no, I'm not held back in any real way, but I know that I am held back somehow. But I don't know. I don't know what. I don't know what and how. So I'm like, if I knew how I was held back by not speaking the language, then that might actually be a really great incentive to
learn the language.
But right now I can just go about my life just fine without a word of it. And so it's that kind of push and pull around belonging in language, I think is really, really interesting. And I feel like we could keep talking about just this one topic until the end of our time, but we've got a couple more things to get through. And so I'm just going to steer us elsewhere. And that is our obsession with land. And what is it about soil, very specifically, that we are so deeply rooted into? You see images of people getting off planes and kissing the ground because they have come to their land. And, as somebody who's very global, who has, this is like my 6th, 7th country I'm living in, I've lost count. This idea of just the specific earth or specific patch of soil being something that I feel connected to, a little bit weird. Having said that, there are very like strong emotional things around it, or like almost like on a sensory level that get connected to it. So like when I land in Australia, the smell of the burnt grass and the soil and the burnt grass from the heat smells really different to like when I'm landing in Iceland and I see the rocks and the lava fields and so on. And just the look of it can really shape how I feel, and like there's that kind of visceral thing that's going on. So even though I find the concept really weird that people are really attached to it, I know that there's something within me that is pulling onto those feelings. So I'm just curious again, throw this out. Many of us have lived in places where land exchanges hands quite frequently. We've experienced, some of us have experienced conflict, some of us have experienced colonization. Pedro, you've talked about, the different villages and when there's changes to the river and how that affects people as well. And again, having some say or no say in that. Throwing it out there again because I've just decided to let things loose.
Well, it's fantastic what you said about the idea of getting back to Australia and feeling the moment you get out of the plane. I was thinking because I was born in the capital of Brazil, Brasilia, which is a city that was built 61 years ago in the heart of Brazil, as we say, in the middle of the Brazilian savannah. And whenever I get back there, the first thing that I feel when I get off the plane is the dryness of the air. And that's something that most people who went to Brasilia for the first time, they feel repelled by it, because usually when you're in Brazil, you have a lot of moisture in the air. It's very humid. But in Brasilia, it's dry. And it's something that, for me, it's funny to think of it, because this dryness, along with the other things that we have there, like the amount of metal in the air that you can almost taste it and smell it. And it also helps with a fantastic sunset during the dry season. That, for me, it's a part of this feel from home. But I had also another thing that's interesting is that my first 10 years of life, they were in another part of Brazil. I was born in Brasilia, but I was raised in Natal, which is a capital in the northeastern region of Brazil. And when you arrive in Natal, it's completely different, because we have fantastic beaches there, So the moment you get out of the plane, you can feel the salty air from the ocean, and it's like two different countries completely, and they both feel like home for me for different reasons. The first 10 years of my life growing up with a family that was very a very common Brazilian family, that it's everyone together, getting together on the weekends. And I would go to my grandmother's house where I would meet my 10 uncles there, my 30 cousins. And then when I was 10 years old, I moved back to Brasilia, where my family was reduced to me, my brother, sister, my parents, and that's it. And two different situations, two completely different towns, but they both reminds me of home, or they give me this longing feeling for the past. And Natalia said something very interesting, is that she feels sometimes this longing for a place that doesn't exist anymore. And for me, it's the same thing, because the city I left when I was 10 years old, it's not the city that I see today when I get back there. And Brasilia also, it's not the city that I remember growing up on. And that's something that nowadays, for me, when I'm here, usually trying to create something, trying to put a concept into words or translate it into images for a project that I'm working in, it's essential, because it helps me to forget what I am right now and get in a trance, and it's like leaving this world and becoming what I want to translate, what I want to put into words. It's necessary for me, because if I don't have this ability, I'm grounded here, and by being grounded in this situation, this reality, I can only put in the paper what this reality is feeding me. But when I have this other option, this escape to the past, and I can bring concepts from that time to what I'm living now, I can create something that the Pedro from 10 years ago wouldn't be able to, and the Pedro from 6 months ago wouldn't be able to. And that's how I managed to get all realities mixed to create something that only I can translate, because I had this luggage from my past lives and this luggage that I'm building here now. That's something that I believe that most creatives who are expats experience in one way or another. Because even when you're in your own country, I believe that the creative person, it's the odd one out. It's someone who can't really feel like being part of the status quo. We question. We're there to, okay, so that's the reality you're selling me, but that's not the reality I see. That's not the reality I have to be in. I am able to create my own. And being this expat, it's every day an exercise on building a new reality based on what you had and what you're experiencing now. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's something that got me thinking when you spoke.
Yeah, absolutely. What else?
I can add something. It's very interesting. It's one of the on the early stages that I realized that I'm banned from going back to my country. I was at the same time working in a project with indigenous people of Europe, the Sami people, about why human being doesn't feel home in nature. So that was the whole idea. So I wanted to find the root of that among indigenous people, and especially Sami people, because Sami people are reindeer herders, but they follow the reindeer. So the reindeer is widely just like going around, and the Sami people follow them. So they're having a nomadic life. And I was kind of feeling, okay, so they're following the nature. It's not like they're controlling it. Well, that's the idea. But when I arrived there, I realized this common sadness, like a deep sadness there, because what climate change did to them is that the climate change, and also so many parts of the land was taken by the government. So Sapmi is the Sami land, is north of Sweden, Finland, Norway, and a little bit of Russia. And if they lose, so their reindeer, they have to feed them because of climate change, and then they are not wild anymore. They stay, they don't travel, so that they cannot follow them. And the Sapmi goes as far as a reindeer goes. So if the reindeer doesn't go, they're gonna lose their right to the land. And for them, it will be like, if I don't have Sapmi, then Sami doesn't exist, because Sami is somebody that lives in Sapmi. And for them, there was this identity crisis that was going on. And me going there with a background of philosophy and Nietzsche, you need to get out of this herd mentality, you need to become who you are. I was having so much problem of understanding, what do you mean if you lose the reindeer, you lose your identity? How about you? How about the individual you? What is Sami in Stockholm? What is Sami in Iran or on Mars and Moon? Is there any meaning of that? And it just it was keep hitting me in the head that you don't have a land anymore. So it means you don't have an identity. Don't force them to find another identity. It's you that you're homeless and identityless and everything. And literally it just made me think a lot, and I'm dragging that thing, I left with the question, and I'm just dragging that question all the way. And even when I came here to Iceland, working on making Iceland a greener, like a bluer place, or who am I to tell Icelandic people what should they do, or all of these things, I don't share an identity with these people. How can I be an activist here? And then it was interesting that I was looking at the whales, and then the whales are migratory. And then that totally changed the idea of immigration for me. So it's immigration, migratory. Why migratory is a positive thing, but immigration is a negative thing, because you kind of feel and it took me back to this question that a friend of, something that this Sami friend of mine told me, that she told me, you can never belong to Sami people. But I was just yeah, but when you travel, as you grow, the places that you feel home constantly, that place belongs to you. It will be part of your consciousness, not that you're gonna belong to them. And I was just the whole idea of land kind of changed for me, the whole idea of homeland. And I still think that there is this complex idea, I'm still thinking about it. So this is more like a question rather than an answer, that literally how much a land can affect your identity, or your identity can affect that land. So that's the question I'm going to leave you with. Yeah.
I feel like, Taya, do you have something to add?
Very quickly, the discussion of land really reminds me also of a very central point of Canadian and Indigenous discourse around land back and giving land back to Indigenous land stewards. It's also a good time to bring it up, as the wildfires in Canada completely mess up the air quality of the rest of the world. And but besides the wildfires being exacerbated by climate change and drier seasons and heavier rainstorms, the land that now has massive wildfires on it was maintained with Indigenous land traditions of collecting the pine needles and doing controlled burns of the brush, so that when the lightning strikes all the way up north, 20 acres away from where you are, it's not creating such of a large firestorm as it does now. I mean, even in my home province of British Columbia, I think there's maybe over 32 out of control wildfires that are over 20 hectares across. And of these wildfires stemmed from the banning and the marginalization of Indigenous people, as well as their ancestral land practices. And so as everyone kind of throws their hands up saying, what should we do? What should we do? They don't even think to acknowledge that that wasn't always the case, and that had never been the case prior to colonization and prior to the establishment of the state saying that you should no longer do these controlled burns in a way of getting rid of Indigenous practices across Canada. There's so many issues with unceded territory as well. Like, I grew up on unceded Similkameen territory, and I spent my formative years growing up in Musqueam Coast Salish lands. And there's so much that goes on regarding pipelines, oil pipelines, and blockading this land, and state intervention that immediately is always turned to violence, logging of ancient forests for the lumber industry. And it always feels like, there's a saying that's like cutting off the nose to slight the face. And it always feels like this, that you, or that the state, that the government of Canada is always saying, we love our Indigenous practices. They changed the national anthem even to acknowledge that Canada is on traditional native land. But it's always just the platitudes without any real action. We have Indigenous cultural leaders who know how to fix the problems that we have, but it's the multi-layers of intersectionality and the white supremacist post-colonial state that denies these actions from being taken. And so this was flirting through my mind.
We had a lot of the same conversations in Australia as well, very specifically about wildfire management. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We are like slowly running out of time, and I know that I think there's at least one question from the audience. I wanted to maybe just spend like 2 minutes really quick, kind of on the last point that I quickly wanted to discuss, just because I feel it's important to tie it all up. And Taya, it was actually a little bit about your work, and and Anahita, you actually just touched on it a little bit with the Sami and the deer. And that is these kind of relationships that we have with our non-human companions, and how important it is to the evolution of a people and the evolution of our land. But I wanted to take it kind of to the next step, and as we're moving closer and closer to a moon base or a Mars base and sort of colonizing space, at least I don't see a lot of research into how we bring our non-human companions with us. And I understand the practical reasons for that. It's difficult enough to get a human up there, let alone like how do we take care of other creatures at the same time? But I'm wondering for the rest of you, my big question is, can we even have an off-planet society and the next step of kind of human evolution without our non-human companions? Because to me, that's a really, I don't know. I mean, I don't have pets, but I have had pets, and I know how important they were to the evolution of me as a person. So I'm just curious about that. How do we do that without them or with them? And anyway, just throwing that out as a question.
I'll take a little stab at it. I'm sure maybe you also saw my cat poking his head in through the camera at certain points. So he's around. He's always wants to be part of this conversation. But I think human and animal cohabitation has been so integral for the development of society, of civilization, society, what we consider to be the fabric between humans and non-humans, our relationship with nature, the domestication of dogs and the domestication of cats for getting rid of disease, or that dogs go out to hunt with you. These are really like instrumental founding pieces. And then the question is, how do we bring this into like space, the final frontier, et cetera, when cats and dogs, they don't their bodies won't climatize the same way. They perhaps won't even understand what's happened. I know when I moved my cat from Canada to the Netherlands, I think he noticed that the air smelled different. But also, who am I to say what out of this change he recognized or how it affected him? And I think it has a lot to do with human agency over non-humans, and how do we feel that we take up space in their life, or how do we control their life? Is it ethical to bring my cat to the moon to live with me for the rest of my life? Does my creature comfort with my cat outweigh his potential for happiness, his wish to roam outside and maybe catch a mouse? How does my wish to maintain this companionship translate ethically into the future? That's also.
Oh no. Yeah.
I hope you can still hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. Love that. Yeah, my submission to the Moon Gallery, cat_purringcomfort.mp3, was really talking about the relationship that I have with my cat for the last 8 years, and how is it even ethical for me to continue this relationship with him in this space age future? All the ethical questions that come into our relationship. Is it me just being dominant and anthrocentric that I say that you must come with me? There's so many ethical and moral questions that come with non-human companionship, especially when non-humans cannot speak and represent themselves the same way that we represent and advocate for ourselves. And so I think there's a lot of philosophical burdens that arise because of this discussion, but it's a very good discussion to have.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that as well. I mean, for me, it's very interesting that, when I was, of course, doing research about like the place of human in the nature, there are these two different energies of communicating with nature. One is like, I remember there was this guy that I was trying to take care of the greenhouse, and when I was in that area, and then he said like, no, you have to get rid of the bad plants and take care of the good plants. And then for me, I was just like, which is the good plant, which is the bad plant? I cannot decide just which ones to kill, and this idea of wilderness, this idea of not dominating or not taming the nature. We've totally lost that meaning. We tame ourselves, let alone the nature. That's why we cannot put ourselves there. I think it's the mentality. What kind of mentality are we going to take with us there? Are we going to look at the animal companionship as like, again, this as Thea was saying, again, as like this form of dominance? Or are we taking this idea of like companionship as a wilderness and accepting everything and taking it there? And can we take any form of wilderness on the moon? Or we're just taking the isolated creature of human out of its and then just put it somewhere there? And it's just like a very interesting thing. Can we start creating a habitat there so the life can thrive without our claws on them? So I think that's a very good point, because if this place will be uninhabitable, then maybe it's a good idea to share some space with other creatures up there as well, but not as a zoo. That's just like horrifying for me to think about. Yeah.
All right.
No, yeah, I totally agree. It is horrifying, but at the same time, I feel like it is such a complex process, because for us humans, we can already, or like through research, we already know what kind of mediation or what kind of level of mediation there would have to be in between of us and environment, if we kind of trying to imagine ourselves outside of the planet Earth, but also inside of the planet Earth, because certain ecological conditions are getting more and more extreme. And this is crazy to think about how would that be for the animals, because of course, like one way or another, whether something happens on the earth that you really would need a certain mediator between you and the environment, this is still something that we would decide for, I don't know, animals in general, or our pets, our like non-human companions. And this is something that we would kind of trying to save, yet still kind of impose on them as a no choice thing. So I don't know, for me, it's always goes around that, and it can be as simple conversations as, I don't know, I'm having with my husband whether the cat should be only living inside of the home, or should you let the cat kind of run outside, because then it's of course much more exciting, but then you don't have the full control over the safety of your pet. So
I find it interesting that I think in any popular culture that I have absorbed that is kind of futuristic or sci-fi or space agey, I can't think of any where there is even like in the background a pet or like an animal like on a spaceship or something. And I find it so fascinating that, you know, artists and creators cannot seem to imagine interplanetary future humanity with our animal companions. And I don't know why that is. I'm really curious about that, but I'm going to leave that question for you guys to all ponder on, because we're at time. And we do have a couple of questions, I think, from the audience. So I'm going to toss it over to Lisa, who I think maybe is a bit more across that than I am right now.
Yeah, no, I think there is mainly one question. So reflecting on our discussion around how the different words have a different meaning for us in different languages, like a rainbow example. Yeah, the question was about maybe a word home. Does it have a different connotation for you in different languages? Or, I don't know, some words which are associated maybe closely with a home, example of a Dutch language. Gezelligheid. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And yeah, like what would this word home or words related to home mean for you from a different point? As another example, the person asking the question made example in the Russian language. For example, we don't have a differentiation between home and a house. So the word dom would like both mean a physical building and yeah, a home kind of as a non-physical concept, which like in our language, for example, they're not, you cannot separate them, I believe, or I cannot come up with it. Right. So yeah, maybe you can, like if someone has something to add about it.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, because in Buryat language it's the same. So in Buryat we have the word gur, and it also means a physical space, but then also the concept of home in a broader sense. And I'm quite surprised that in Russian it's quite the same, because we live in a different cultural and religious domain. So we are Buddhist, like, of course, not every Siberian is Buddhist, but Buryatia is a Buddhist republic and has also a shamanistic background. And I found it interesting that in Russian and in Buryat is the same. We should dig into that together, Elizaveta.
Yeah, which one would you expect? Like, I don't know. That's also funny for me, because I feel like in the Russian mentality, we actually do separate like a feeling of, or like a concept of home and the building itself, but funny that it is not absolutely reflected indeed in a language.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But Bosnia and Croatian are the same, by the way. So the Croatian actually does have a slightly different word for going home versus the building, but Bosnian is the same, and yeah, it's a tricky little conceptual thing to kind of get your head around sometimes.
No, in Persian it means totally something different. It means something like a container for a which it, like when you go back to the philosophy of it, and then the beginning of the idea of architecture in Persian, in Iran, it I mean, home is a container that contains a containable creature. So when you think about it, it's more like it doesn't come as the idea of a limitation, but something that can hold you again, and goes back to the idea of that you have to find a home that contains this new personality that you are, or something that it is. It shouldn't be tighter, or it shouldn't be bigger. That is so much different than the like the home than when I say it in English, of course, that version, which is, yeah, I think that's a yes to that answer.
Well, in Brazil, we have two words for it, lar and casa, which could be related to house as casa and home as lar, because the house is more something that's related to the material, what you own, where you go to sleep. But if, for example, you live in a house that you don't feel as part of it, for example, you have a bad relation with other people who live there, it's hardly a home. It's a house, but it's hardly a home. While the home is more related to where you feel safe, where you feel yourself. It's more a feeling. A man can have many houses, but just one home. It's something that we used to say. And when we talk about earth, we use both words, because at the same time, it's our home, it's our lair, it's our house. And if we're not able to protect it, to understand our relationship with it, it will be less and less a home and more a house that we deplete, that we destroy. And at the end of the day, you want to keep your house a home. That's maybe. And when you see the indigenous people in Brazil, some of them have a concept that they call oca. Not all of them, but a few tribes. And the oca, it's a big house made of materials from the woods that all the tribe lives inside. So it's a mix of both, and they have a different idea of the individual, of what belongs to one or another. A child who's born in a tribe, they have all the tribe. It's the kid's parents. Everyone's responsible for that kid, and that translates a little bit of this different view of society that starts with the building they live together. And that's something that I find beautiful.
I always talk about when I move somewhere new and it takes me a while to settle in, that I feel like I'm in a place when I have my tribe. And even though we aren't all living under one roof, there is a feeling of that. So I'm gonna have to wrap it up because we are already 8 minutes over time, and sadly, I was worried that we would have this like a huge gap of time left, but actually you guys have brought such an amazing conversation and really interesting perspectives, and I want to thank each of you for joining us. This has been a really fulfilling hour and a half for me, at least.
Yeah, thank you, Leila, thank you, Elisabetta, thank you, Anna, that is not here, and thank you everybody who were just like listening. And yeah, great, all of you. Thank you for teaching me a lot. I mean, I have a lot to think now.
Yes, I also want to thank everyone for joining. Since I was reaching out to most of you, thank you for agreeing to participate in today's conversation. That was really very pleasant conversation, and I was genuinely really curious about all the stories and about all the views that were brought in today. On a request of my co-curator, I will read one quote from the chat of the people who were watching us. It's from Moon Gallery artist Mary Cowper, and she wrote, "I never forget the advice of the family doctor who said, always give him your breast when he feels uncomfortable. Your breast is home for a baby." So let's use this beautiful quote to wrap up our meeting. And
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who is watching.
Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your
Thank you,
Saturday.
everyone.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.